Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Tonight on All In, we have heard from another juror in the Trayvon Martin case. The one non-white juror who spoke on ABC today and said, quote, George Zimmerman got away with murder. We'll be talking about that coming up. Also tonight, John Boehner has a cantaloupe-sized Steve King problem. And the longer it goes on, the worse it is for the Speaker of the House. Plus, sex scandals and second chances. America seems always ready to forgive the men involved. But what about the women? That's all coming up. But tonight we begin with Texas, once again locked in a fierce battle with the federal government, this time over voting. You see, Texas probably thought they were in the clear after the Supreme Court struck down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act last month. This morning, Attorney General Eric Holder, speaking at the National Urban League in Philadelphia, said, not so fast.
Today, I am announcing that the Justice Department will ask a federal court in Texas to subject the state of Texas to a pre-clearance regime similar to the one required by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
What Holder announced today is an aggressive and crafty step by the federal government to try and limit the damage caused by the Supreme Court last month. By using a little-known part of the law left intact, Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act, which says the federal government could go to court and basically grab a jurisdiction and yank it under federal control.
Based on the evidence of intentional racial discrimination that was presented just last year in the redistricting case of Texas v. Holder, as well as the history of pervasive voting-related discrimination against racial minorities that the Supreme Court itself has recognized, we believe that the state of Texas should be required to go through a pre-clearance process whenever it changes its voting laws and practices.
Texas, along with many of the states of the old Confederacy, responded to the Supreme Court's ruling with glee and with new or previously blocked restrictive voting laws. Within hours of the ruling, Texas Attorney General praised the voting rights decision and announced the state's voter ID law, which was blocked by a federal court last year, would, quote, take effect immediately. That law is only one of two voting laws that have been blocked by federal courts in Texas over the last year. Now, given the state's proclivity to passing restrictive voting laws, it should come as no shock that today's step from the Obama Justice Department has set off a flurry of angry responses from Texas officials, including Governor Rick Perry, who said of the announcement, quote, once again, the Obama administration is demonstrating utter contempt for a country's system of checks and balances, not to mention the U.S. Constitution. We all know there's nothing Texas loves more than a standoff with the federal government. And today, Eric Holder let them know that's exactly what they're going to get. Joining me now is Congressman Mark Vesey, Democrat from Texas, who represents areas of Dallas and Fort Worth. He's a named plaintiff in a federal lawsuit challenging Texas's new voter ID law. And Congressman, my first question to you is, given the fact that there's a lot of Texas pride and Texans don't like being told what to do by the federal government, does today's actions by the Department of Justice put you in an awkward position politically in your home state and home district?
No, it does not put me in a politically awkward situation. And as a matter of fact, I applaud the Attorney General for what he's doing. Chris, you may remember a couple of weeks ago that I actually filed suit in Corpus Christi to stop the voter ID law from being implemented. And I'm also a plaintiff on the redistricting case as well. And discrimination anywhere is bad, especially in Texas. And everyone should come together, regardless of what party that they're in, to make sure that all voters are treated equally and treated with respect. So I actually applaud the Attorney General and thank him for his actions today.
Do you think Texas has a history of racially discriminatory laws, not just in their impact, but the standard that has to be met here is in their intent, that essentially what you are saying, if you are adhering to this theory, is that the members of the Texas state legislature, in doing redistricting, in passing laws for voter ID, intend to racially discriminate?
Chris, not only does Texas have a history of discrimination, it's a recent history. When you look at the recent findings by courts in regards to the voter ID law that the Republicans tried to pass that would have disenfranchised thousands of Latino and African-American voters, when you look at redistricting, when you look at the Republican Party's embrace of groups like the King Street Patriots that seek to disenfranchise minority voters and Latino, both Latino and African American, it's clear that not only does Texas have a history of discrimination, but Texas has a very recent history of discrimination that is bad, and it needs to be stopped. And that's why I applaud the Attorney General for what he did today. If any state needs to opt in to Section 5, it needs to be Texas.
Texas Republicans have been remarkably brazen about all of this and have seemed remarkably uncowed by any of the federal government's actions to block them in the past. Is this going to be any different, or is this something that Rick Perry and the other Republicans of Texas can kind of gloat over, that they're taking on the hated Obama administration and standing up for Texas?
Sadly, they probably will gloat. Again, discrimination is something that we should all band together to fight. Why they would want to gloat against discriminating against the fastest growing ethnic groups in the state. And when you look at the state of Texas, Chris, for instance, between 2000 and 2010, Texas was the fastest growing state of any other place in the union. 90% of that growth between 2000 and 2010 was Latino and African American. Why the Republicans would want to discriminate against Latino and African American voters instead of trying to do outreach continues to puzzle many. And I think that it's a bad thing. We all need to band together to stop these sort of actions. And we need to be doing everything we can to get everyone to vote. Trying to limit the right of individuals to vote and to exercise their suffrage is a bad thing, and it's not the friendly Texas thing to do.
Oh, that's very sporting. I have a theory or two about why Republicans might want to restrict the franchise for some of the people you named. Congressman Mark Vesey of Texas, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Joining me at the table is Julie Fernandez, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department, where she worked on the Voting Rights Act, now a senior policy analyst with the Open Society Institute. I did not know what Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act was until today, and I consider myself a little bit of a Voting Rights Act buff. What is Section 3? What is the federal government doing here, and why do they have the authority to do it?
Well, Section 3 is the provision of the Voting Rights Act that has been there since 1965 that allows federal courts to order that certain jurisdictions be covered by the preclearance obligations if they find that that jurisdiction has engaged in intentional discrimination.
So the idea here, just to walk people through this,
right.
You've got this map that is covered by Section 5, which is preclearance, right?
Correct.
Section 4 is the part of the act that draws the map, right?
Correct.
These are the places that you have to go to the federal government and be like, is this cool that we do this? And they say yes or no, right?
Correct.
Section 3 says we are not going to limit the areas simply to that map because things may change. So in the future, federal government, you have the power to go to court and grab people and say, okay, you're now going to be subject to preclearance.
They have the ability to, either the federal government, either the Attorney General or private plaintiffs can go to a federal court and say, we think this jurisdiction is discriminating. And we think that if you find they've been discriminating where it's intentional, and there are other factors present that make you worried about their future intentional discrimination or discrimination against minority voters, then you can cover them under the preclearance regime. The Section 5 preclearance regime always had a way in and a way out.
Right. So this is a way in. So here's my question to you. We're hearing about the law that is being proposed by Republicans in North Carolina that is being called the most restrictive voter law ever anywhere in the country. It's going to make it much harder for a lot of people to vote, right? Could the federal government use, or private parties use, this Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act to stop that law in North Carolina as well, or any laws wherever they might be across the country?
Well, I think the question that Congress is going to have to look at, because Congress is right now looking at whether or not the tools that are left in the Voting Rights Act after Shelby County are enough to protect minority voters. And what they're going to have to look at is whether or not 3C is a realistic mechanism, the way it's currently drafted, in order to have the worst actors brought into a preclearance regime to stop discrimination. And are the other parts of the statute also sufficient? So 3C is not a panacea as it's currently written, and I think no one sees it that way. This was happening in Texas as an example of how it could be used, but there are lots of questions for Congress to answer here about the effectiveness of this mechanism.
What I'm hearing from you is this is a creative playing of a bad hand that has been dealt to the Justice Department in the wake of the Supreme Court's reckless decision, but it is not in any way a substitute for the part of the act, the heart of the act, the preclearance provision, which has been rendered moot by the Supreme Court.
Well, and part of this really, Chris, is that Texas redistricting is very high profile. Right. Tons of people are in this case. There's lots of litigation.
It's our A block tonight. We're starting the show with it.
Exactly. There are lots of, the civil rights groups have been litigating this stuff. There's tons of resources going to it. For the most most part, for most voting changes, that's not the case. In the counties and parishes and school boards around the country, the discrimination that goes on will be under the radar. It will not be well resourced for litigation. Affirmative litigation will never be the way.
And you sat in that. You sat in that building, the Department of Justice, looking at these applications from those places.
We used to get them. We used to get in DOJ when we had the pre-clearance regime before Shelby County. We would get submissions from lots and lots of places around where discrimination was happening. Now we don't get that. Now who knows what's happening?
Julie Fernandez with the Open Society Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When we return, one of the 6 jurors who found George Zimmerman not guilty tonight tells ABC she thinks he got away with murder.